Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Des Traynor with us. Des, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. You are currently the co-founder and COO of Intercom, and that's at intercom.io, which is a pretty awesome company that's been mentioned a few times on this program already, actually. But go ahead and tell us from yourself, what is Intercom?
So effectively, Intercom is a communication platform for web products to speak with their customers of any sort. So what that usually means is everything from talking to your customers right after they signed up, either inside your product or by email, to communicating new feature releases, all the way through to dealing, with any issues your customers might have as using your product. And if customers look like they're slipping away, how can you talk to them to learn why they've stopped using your product? Effectively, what we do is we provide the information you need to understand how your users are behaving, and then we provide you the tools that you need to communicate based on that behavior.
All right, so it's part understanding what they're doing, so you're actually watching what your users are doing on your site, so it's part kind of analytics, and then the other part is just communication, which is where the intercom idea comes in. It's a way for you to speak to your customers at different phases in their life cycle, after they take certain actions, just at set intervals, kind of however you want to talk to them, right?
Exactly, yeah. So you have it totally right in terms of it's called intercom because it's basically, the idea is like you buzz and speak through to your customer as they're using your product or whatever. But doing that and that alone leaves you blind to who you're speaking to. So what you need to have is a sense of, I want to tell people to use the report generating tool more. Well, who do you want to say that to? You only want to say that to the people who aren't using it. And how do you know that's even a problem? Well, let's see how many people aren't using it. Okay, looks like 50% of our user base isn't using it. Let's talk to them about it. Let's not bother the other 50% who are busy using it every day. I think what companies miss is like that over communicating the wrong message to the wrong people. So if you're trying to upgrade people who are already on your premium plan, or if you're trying to tell people to use a feature they're already using or they've already said they don't want, what you do is you train them to ignore you. And what ignoring you looks like is it takes a few different forms. Some people just, they are quite good at Gmail. They set up filters. They just say like, whenever this guy mails me, throw it in the bin. Other people just set up a mental filter, which is whenever this guy emails me, archive it on site. Other people unsubscribe. But effectively what you're doing is you're training your own customers not to listen to the messages you have, which is a really dangerous thing. So that's why we always try to encourage people to there's almost never a good reason to communicate to your entire user base. Like it's maybe a once or twice a year type thing. But inevitably, anytime something happens, people are like, oh, we had an outage on Sunday evening. Let's mail our entire user base. And I'm like, well, let's mail the guys who are on Sunday. Maybe they care. I don't think anyone else gives a shit,
Yeah.
So it's like really tell the right people the right message at the right time and you'll get results. If you do the opposite, what you get is like archives and unsubscribes, and ultimately you lose a channel of talking to your customers. The real danger there is, and this is a point I always make, you should talk to your customers well, because if you don't, one of your competitors will. So it's often I talk to founders who are in a situation where they're like, all these guys unsubscribe from my mailing list, and I'm like, do you know what, they haven't unsubscribed from other people's mailing lists. So you're now in a position where it'd be like, imagine like you're dating somebody and the only person they won't listen to is you. It's like you don't stand a chance, So it's really like targeted communications are really important, and you can't target without data, which is why that part of the product exists.
Yeah, no, that's great. And all you have to do, right, is just put JavaScript on your site, and then you can filter it on Intercom. So on Intercom, you can set up those filters. You don't have to set them up beforehand, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you just basically install a little bit of JavaScript like Google Analytics or any of those tools, and you choose what information you want to send us. So if you're Instagram, you'd send us, photos, likes, friends, whatever. If you're like Basecamp, you'd send us like projects, teammates, messages, files. And the more information you send us, typically the more valuable it gets. But where it just, once you have that information there, retrospectively, you can then go and say, I wonder, has anyone ever not used our upload file feature? Well, just filter the files equals 0. Look, there's 6,000 of them. Let's find out why they're not using it.
That's great. Now on your homepage, it kind of mentions some of the things that Intercom can replace in certain situations. And here's a list of them. It can replace help desk, email marketing, customer relationship management, CRM, marketing automation tools. Tell us how people are using that, how your customers are using it to really replace some of those things.
So what happens within it, so I'll just go broad for a second and I'll give you specifics. So typically what happens is when a tool is brought into the workplace of any sort, people use it to do different things. And if it takes off, lots of people copy it. And then what you have is what was a product turns into an industry. So you have like the email marketing industry, right? You know, and then the industry starts to define the tool, even though the tool at the outset defined the industry. And when that happens, people lose track of what the fundamental jobs that people were actually trying to do with the tool was. So people have in their heads that, like, you know, a help desk solution has to have priorities and tags and flags and ordering and assignment and this and that, etc. Right? And that's because that's what all the other ones have. Whereas if you actually like really drill into the job that people are trying to do with a help desk or with email marketing or with any of these tools, you realize that an awful lot of the sort of foundations have changed a lot. So, you know, perfect example would be the notion of CRM for a web business is different to the notion of CRM for a traveling salesman in 1995. But the assumptions, when someone sits down to do CRM, they still think they need the same things. Whereas in reality, what they actually need, like, you know, to do the same job, they actually need a different set of things these days. So in our case, what we've built is a communications platform for web businesses to talk to their customers. The talking to customers tends to fall into lots of different categories, but we don't really think of it in that way anymore. We just think of it in terms of what's the job you're trying to do. Are you trying to announce a feature to all your customers? Well, maybe you might use an email marketing tool to do that, but for us, that's just an announcement to a lot of people. Conversely, are you trying to ask a customer what's going wrong? Well, maybe you'd use a help desk to do that, but for us, that's just talking to one person. So we just specifically focus on what the different jobs that people try to do as they're running a web business are, and we make sure that we support them. And in that sense, people try to pigeonhole us into specific niches, but that's not really like correct. That's not how we see ourselves. We are the tool for talking to your customers.
Yeah, which makes even more sense of the name Intercom. It's kind of the perfect name to sum up that it's about communication. It's not about one, you know, pigeonholed kind of communication. Talk to me about some of the case studies. What are some of the companies that have seen growth from it or seen some kind of benefit from their business? Talk to me about the sales pitch for a second.
So we feature a lot of these in our blog. So our blog's really popular. It gets like lots and lots of traffic, and we feature, you know, the best applications or best practices of Intercom. So a guy called Nathan Contney has a product called Draft, which is a tool for improving writing, and he basically increased his revenue by 200% just with a well-timed series of messages inside the product. So when people logged in, he'd remind them to upgrade or tell them about all the new features that he has built for them, and then say, hey, and if you want to upgrade to the premium feature, it'll work. And, you know, he sent us a great graph that we featured on the blog that just showed revenue, like, just, you know, it was petering along, it was just a spike. And that was just like a simple, like, part of the reason Intercom works so well is because we've made a lot of these things easy to do. Because if you ask any typical web business owner, would you like to be able to throw a message inside your product that says this, and they're like, yeah, but Jesus, I have to go and nag a developer, and there's going to be JavaScript, and we have to check it across browsers. Whereas when it's actually like 3 clicks and like typing one sentence, it becomes, you know, insanely easy. So as a result, people do it a lot more. So that was one example. A lot of people do clever stuff around support. So what they do is the mecca of support is proactive support, which is you come back to your customer with the solution before they even report the problem. And it's a company called Circle, which do continuous integration. They're called Circle CI is their name. And what they do is they realized through Intercom that the biggest leading indicator of them losing a customer was a failed build. So continuous integration is basically, well, the details aren't really super important, but like one of the key things Circle should be able to do for you is like build your product. And they knew if somebody signed up and couldn't get their product to build through Circle, the whole thing would fall apart. Like, they'd lose the customer basically, like, oh, fuck this, I'm not bothered. So they were like, right, well, what are we going to do? So they have a triggered Intercom message that pops up and says, hey, there's a problem with your build. Click here to contact us, which would, again, open Intercom. Or read this doc page on your failing builds, or do something else. And I can't remember the numbers, but I think like they rescued maybe like 45% more, of what would have been failed customers purely by like just identifying an issue and creating a message associated with it. There's plenty of other examples. I'm just trying to think. Another guy's called Auth0. They have another slightly more interesting take on support. They've automated some back-end processes to make it real smart. But basically, I think it emails people anytime anything's about to go wrong, so that they can step in and solve it. So again, everyone, like, a lot of the realizations are just around, there are certain attributes of behavior that happen or that exist before something goes wrong, and we stand to lose a customer. If we can identify them and act on them, we'll keep the customer. And then there's other use cases around, like, we have a great one ourselves. If somebody uses Intercom, has logged in more than 25 times, we just suggest they should follow us on Twitter. And by doing that, our Twitter account went from, again, just real small petering along to this sort of hockey stick almost of activity. And it's just, all of these ideas that we have, they're not, they're experiments effectively, and a lot of them work out, a lot of them don't work out. But the great thing with Intercom is you can just try it on 10 users. If it doesn't work, don't do it.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, before Intercom in the world, I think it was try it on my entire user base, and if it doesn't work, oh well, I'll probably lose 1% of unsubscribes. Whereas now the punishment for a bad idea is pretty minimal, and the rewards for execution of a good idea can be anything from saving a lot more customers to a 200% increase in revenues. So.
Yeah, it seems like, for the sake of our audience here on Growth Hacker TV, it seems like communication is a growth hack. Being able just to communicate accurately at the right time with the right message to the right person can actually increase revenue, increase visits, increase retention. It's a trial and error. You have to try certain things and see what works. But communication is really a huge aspect of growing a website, right?
I think that's totally true. And the one point I always make to people is your goal with Intercom, or when you're communicating with users, most of the time you want them to go and do something. As in, hey, go here, use this feature, go here and upgrade, go here and sign up, or whatever. But the other secondary goal, which Intercom is great for too, is if you can't get them to do that, find out why. Because if you want to call the first part a growth hack, I'd call this part a product hack, which is one of the things I love about people who set up Intercom well is they're always they're more impressed. Well, they're always impressed with we got a 3% or 10% increase in this or that or the other, or now people are using our tool and they weren't, or whatever. But a lot of them come back and say, what's great is that because of this auto message that's sending out every day, I have a drip feed coming into my company of reasons why people won't use this. And all we ever do when we sit down at the start of a week is we say, right, what came back this week? Oh, it turns out people, it's a Firefox bug, let's fix that. They kind of, I can't imagine not having this because we've had it for so long. But for so many companies, the product hack of it is kind of, imagine if just every week, while you sleep, while you eat, while you party, Intercom is busy gathering reasons why people won't use your product, or for the ones who will, it's promoting them and prompting them to do it. Yeah. So communication is totally a growth hack, but the outcome of communication doesn't just have to be a percentage increase. It can also be, and we now have really, really good data on why people won't do this or what sucks about our feature or whatever.
Sure. What are some of the most clever or bizarre kind of implementations that you've seen? Have you seen anybody use Intercom in just some really outlandish way to do something?
There's some interesting ones. People use this in weird ways technically that we wouldn't have expected. Intercom exists in a lot of browser extensions, or we don't have an OS X client, but people have managed to somehow get that working through clever combinations of web views and stuff like that. A lot of people use this to do clever things, Black Monday in the US, or Cyber Monday, whatever it's called, the sales day. That totally caught me off guard, just because, again, it's not something that I don't experience that either here in Dublin or in general. But our messages sent went through the roof. And we're what's going on? And what it was everyone, obviously word must have got round that this is a good idea, but everyone just basically mailed their entire non-active user base discount codes and saying, hey, if you want to come back and use this product, here's a massive discount. And the discount would be 2 months free or whatever. But again, it resulted in a significant bump in signups and activity. And I always think of Cyber Monday as being half price stereos and televisions. It had never occurred to me that SaaS apps could have an equivalent party pack, if you like. So that was kind of interesting. There's other what I love about Intercom most, or about our customers most, is that they teach us that we've basically created a platform for experimenting, and we kind of stand to benefit so well, and we try to distribute the knowledge back. But one thing was a lot of people talk about retention in software as a service, because it's basically the big problem. If you can't retain customers, you don't have a SaaS business. You're basically going to die within 6 or 12 months or whatever. Mm-hmm. So retention is always an issue. And again, my argument is always, if you can't bring them back, find out why they left. The best guys who've done this, they're a music-based startup in the UK, and What they did was they have a message that goes out to people who have been inactive for the past 30 days. But what it does is it includes features and screenshots and videos of everything they shipped within the past 30 days. Mm-hmm. So the reason that works, as opposed to, hey, we miss you, please come back, because that stuff doesn't work. Like, quantifiably, if anything, it just annoys people even further. Mm-hmm. But what's good about, this take is that rather than just trying to nag people, they've actually given them a good reason to come back. They're like, so here's 5 features we've built in the past 30 days. We think this will entice you to return. If not, please tell us why. Mm-hmm. And then they get 2 great effects from that. One, they start claiming back customers, they sort of patching up a leaky bucket. But secondly, and more importantly, that they get to learn what the hell's gone wrong. Mm-hmm. So people don't realize that inactive customers, whilst you can write them off in a lot of ways, there's definitely some of them that could be won back, but they're a really good source that lets you know what's going wrong, either in your product or in your onboarding, or at the highest level in your marketing itself. So another example was we had a customer who was like, hey, look, we got like 8,000 signups and only like 50 of them stuck around. What the hell's gone wrong? And I was like, well, that is pretty appalling. So we went looking, and what we did was, and this is another clever thing, people sent us the original referring URL from where people signed up. And what they realized, this is a weddings website, a very popular weddings website, and they had basically been tech crunched, which meant they got a absolute shed load of new signups. Mm-hmm. But as you'd guessed, the audience of techcrunch.com isn't necessarily the guys who you're hoping to like plan their dream wedding. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure, like as I said, they got 50, but like 50 out of 8,000 is probably about right for people spontaneously looking to plan a wedding. So those sort of things are just interesting. And what we realized there was, well, it turns out if you do get TechCrunch, please make sure that you stand to benefit from the traffic, because basically like the source of like a lot of like brides to be or couples looking to get married isn't TechCrunch.com. It's much more likely to be a weddings forum or something. So that was interesting too.
Yeah, the quality of the channel matters. Now let's talk about data a little bit. I want to talk about it because Intercom is all about data. You're giving data and allowing people to act upon that data. But also you have some unique views on data, because we have a lot of people on this show and they talk about how important data is, why you got to be data driven. But as I'm looking at your stuff online, it seems like you have a broader view of the role data plays in an organization. So I want to talk about that a little bit. When is data not the point? Because I saw a blog post you recently wrote where sometimes, we present data and it's not the point.
Yeah, so there's a few different angles I have on this. Like, one of them is like my absolute background was, I used to be a researcher in university, and my area was like mixed method analysis. So you combine qualitative and quantitative data. And I've kind of, since moving into the tech industry and specifically into like startups, people throw data at you all the time. And the first problem with it is for me is that so much of it's just really like, it's a really appalling analysis of basic, what should be basic stats, and people just fundamentally misunderstand it to an embarrassing level. But that's only part of it. Secondly, I think that the whole startup industry does not give enough weight to the value of like actually like talking to customers. They'd much rather analyze 65 data points than pick up the phone and ring them. Mm-hmm. And it's just there's so much is lost when you relegate someone's experience when they sign up for your product to a set of data points, as in they got to funnel step 2. I'm like, okay, grand, and they'll make all these crazy assumptions about like what went wrong, and we need to work on our uploader better. I'm like, why? Like, how do we know? Like, well, because clearly he couldn't upload. And I'm like, did he want to upload? So like there's that side of it too, which is like, I think they need equal footing. Another thing that is related to that is like people tend to reverse engineer a hypothesis out of a data set, which is just basically bad science. It's not the right way to do things. You should start off with a hypothesis and see if the data backs it up, not look at what the data says and then work out. It's okay to look at what the data says, and if it seems to be saying something interesting, then go and talk to the people involved and see if that matches to reality. But it's the whole like confusion of correlation and causation. When I see firemen, I see fires. Therefore, firemen cause fires. Mm-hmm. So like it's people just need to like explore that a little bit. I think when data is useful is when you've got like large volumes of activities and you're specifically looking to optimize. But I feel that most startup people, they like optimize prematurely. So like they might have maybe 1,000 monthly active users, and maybe their homepage gets like 800 hits a day, and they're spending their time A/B testing, and I'm just I just know that that's not going to conclude anything meaningful. But like at the very best, you're finding like the smallest local maxima that you could possibly find. And like it's really like the piece that people don't look at there is they're like, yeah, yes, but it is a 1% improvement. When I say, right, but you have to, like, if you really believe in this approach, you have to A/B test your investment in A/B testing against the other things your product you could be doing, i.e. building a better product, talking to customers, doing whatever, trying to sell your product. There's lots of different ways to make a dent in your numbers, and like tinkering with shades of red is only one of them.
All right, we have to break that down a little bit. A/B test, whether A/B testing works, right? So you're saying that there could be other things you could be doing that have nothing to do with A/B testing that might move the needle in more significant ways. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And the argument behind that is simply like most startups are like whatever, like 4 to 6 to 7 people. Everything you do is an opportunity cost. Me talking to you right now is an opportunity cost for Intercom. I could be talking to customers, So like the idea that like installing JavaScript and tinkering with experiments and running different things and all that is somehow a one-way bet, like it's guaranteed to win, it's like absolute nonsense. There's like, most people like, they're like, right, Des, I found the exact right shade of blue or the exact right like button alignment, and on the homepage it turns out a slightly bigger red button works. I'm like, that's grand. And what happens when you click it? Oh, we haven't got to the sign up form yet, it's still shit. And I'm like, oh my god, like there's like in air, like what I specifically mean is A/B test. When I say A/B testing, what I mean is like you only have a limited amount of resources, and you have to question the ROI of pursuing A/B testing versus the ROI of improving your product, writing a popular blog post, like trying to direct sales from people, going speak at a conference. Like all of these, like everything you do is an opportunity cost for everything else.
Yeah.
And like for some reason that gets cast aside when people say we invested 44 hours in A/B testing and we got a 0.5% increase. And like for some that's a positive result. And I'm like, yeah, if you've got like 1.5 million users, that is a positive result. And you've got people who are dedicated A/B testing people. Yeah, that's a positive result. But in startups, neither of those things are true. So
yeah, I know, it's great. I mean, just hearing you talk, it makes me think sometimes, we get so deep into the product and so deep into the numbers and so deep into the data sets that we forget just to go outside, get some fresh air, and use common sense. And then approach the product just, okay, I'm trying to move the needle in significant ways. What can I do to do that? And the answer may not be what everybody else is telling you to do. You just have to approach it with a lot of just groundedness. So I love your attitude about it, and it fits in with the philosophy of Intercom. I mean, obviously, communicating with customers sometimes and many times will move the needle more than A/B testing. But I think a lot of product people are afraid to talk to people, so they go to the data instead of going to the people, right?
Yeah, I think people will always try to out-product. And like Dave McClure had a sort of epic Twitter rant about this, that like, the product is like deified way above anything else like distribution or customer communication or any of those sort of things, and that people just think like, and there's some truth and some evidence that like you can build a product focused company that is 100% focused on product and has no marketing department and all that sort of stuff. But like, there's some anecdote out there, but there's certainly like that, like if you look across all the great IPOs and all that, it's certainly not true. Like it's not the resounding statement that all you need to do is product. And like, as a simple, like, I mean, the classic case for me is like people are like, all right, well, I'm trying to get my users to use this new feature called Revenue Analyzer. I'm like, okay, grand. And they're like, so I've tried these 9 different types of buttons, and I'm also trying this, and I'm also trying that. And I'm like, okay, why don't we try putting a message inside the product to people who haven't used it saying, please use it? And people are like, no. And I'm like, yeah, well, like, is our goal here to have a good A/B test, or is our goal to achieve an outcome? Once you start with the actual outcome you want, like you realize there's lots of different ways to get there, and don't bias your view just because you're most comfortable with JavaScript and testing tools.
Yeah, it makes me think about this. One of the things I've learned is how important copywriting is. That sometimes just saying something really clearly matters, and that it's not about all the things around it. It's just they come to the site. What's the headline? What's the subhead? What's the call to action? And Intercom.io almost takes advantage of just the latent power of words themselves. I mean, what can do more than the word in an English language if that's what you speak? Like, that's their communication tool they use all day, every day is their own language. So why not give them communication in the way that they're used to it and then move the needle? Yeah,
that's ultimately it. Like, for me, it's just, like there's none of like the more clear and direct your customers, surprisingly, the better results you get. And as I said, like it's not always necessarily about results; it's about understanding too. Like both sides work, but like the worst case, worst case scenario, if you try to talk to people and convince them to use your new feature and they don't, is that you'll leave understanding why they won't. The worst case scenario, if you try to A/B test your way towards a landing page that will get people to use your new feature, is that you basically have a load of messy data, no significant results, and you're none the wiser.
Yeah.
Or best case, you got a 2% increase, or sorry, 0.2% increase, and you know that green's a slightly better color than off green or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on a similar note, you're an expert on microcopy, which I think goes hand in hand with a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now. I mean, you're giving presentations or webinars on microcopy. Tell us real quick, what is microcopy?
It's kind of a term that was introduced to describe like copy that is specifically used in interfaces such that it has to be abbreviated. So it's the opposite of a long form copy, which is like, imagine writing a paragraph that fits on a button. Well, that'd be ridiculous. So you kind of, it's an microcopy as a term is an acknowledgement of the fact that you need to be brief, concise, and clear in UI for a variety of reasons. So it's almost like a new dialect of English, if you like.
Yeah. And why is microcopy so important? I mean, I believe it is, but tell me, why is it?
So most of the time when people get stuck in a UI, it's because they don't know where they are, or they can't find out how to do what it is they want to do. And most of those problems are best solved with words. And the reason it's important is because if someone lands in a product and their only experience is say just icons or just colors or like really unclear wording such as like home dash meta home or whatever, like just like crazy words that make no sense to anyone, they're not going to know what the hell where they are, and they're not going to know what they want to do. And there could be lots of examples, like a button would say a magnifying glass on it. Is that search or is that zoom? Like people like just some things that just aren't as obvious to people in general. In fact, I think like the only three icons that universally get 100% recognition by software users are bold, italic, and underline. I looked at data on this before, but in general, like the reason microcopy is important is because if you want to say something to your user with absolute clarity, you have to use clear language, and that is going to be microcopy in an interface.
Yeah.
And there are lots of reasons why you'd fall back to icons. For example, like people kind of know if they see a pen next to something, it probably means edit. People, generally know that if they see a plus beside something, it means add or like add another or whatever. Like so, and like aesthetically, that's a much more pleasing interface. And you'll see, and like this, I'm not against that per se, but there are areas in a product where clarity is more important than aesthetic, and in those terms, you'll have to turn to microcopy, and you'll really want to take your time thinking about who you're talking to, what's the message, what's the best way to say it, what information do they need, what's the next step given what you're about to say to them. Because bad microcopy is things like error, full stop, right? And you're like, well, what is the problem, and how do I fix the problem? Because it's only when you put yourself in the mind of the user you realize, don't just say error, tell me what's going wrong. Or another classic is things like a disabled button that says something like merge, and you're like, what the hell does this button do, and why can't I click it? And you're kind of like, well, that's just kind of better wording, and like maybe if you should have a tooltip on hover saying, why don't you select two people before you can merge or something, like that's where copy is key. It's just like help the user at every stumbling block along the way.
Yeah. Now let's talk about UX kind of in general, because you're a UX designer. You're the COO right now, but you do a lot with UX before and in general. And on your homepage, you outline kind of your process, the way you think about UX, the way you think about the process. And I think this is going to be really helpful. So I want to go through these 5 bullet points real quick here.
Sure.
The first thing you say you do is that you have to understand the domain the software is targeting. What do you mean by that?
So I mean, if you're not a football fan, you're trying to build a football product, you're basically in big trouble. Because if you don't have a good familiarity of the domain that you're working in, I specifically mean like the actual knowledge. So if your product targets marketers, you need to know a lot about marketing to speak their language. So this is most common to me when people you see like people trying to build a product because they kind of half saw, oh, you know what, it turns out restaurants don't really have a good solution for updating their menus. I'm going to build one of those. But like if you're not solving the problem that you experience yourself, or you haven't researched greatly, you're really in trouble. So the first piece is to me is like, I would never take on a product of any sort. And certainly when we were consultants, like if I was told, right, we're doing UX consultancy for an online gambling product, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go to a casino. Like that's basic, or I'm going to go to a sports betting shop or whatever. But I'm going to try and learn what the hell is going on here, because otherwise I won't know how to write the right copy. I'm going to come up with things like confirm save, rather than place bet or whatever is appropriate. Like, so it's just you have to have you can't research it on the fly. You actually have to be one of the people you're solving the problem for.
Yeah. It reminds me of a great essay that Paul Graham wrote where he talks about, you have these ideas that you think are really good in terms of a business you could start, but your good ideas are always businesses unrelated to your domain of expertise because you don't know enough to know why they're really bad ideas actually. And the ideas you have in your own domain, you feel like aren't that great because you know so much, you know how things really work, but really, you have to go with your own domain or you have no chance at all.
That's and I would 100% agree. Like I do think you can you can change parts of who you are. So like if you're 25 and you know nothing about soccer, but you want to build a soccer app, you can get interested and you can study and hang around with the right people and go to the right bars and all that. And then you have a chance. But like it has to be that level of commitment. Yeah. It can't be I've got a friend and I'm going to ring him every time I get stuck. It has to be like, no, I am the user.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then the next thing when it comes to what you need to understand to do UX, you talk about the customers the application owner hopes for. Talk us through that a little bit.
So that's just really, you have to have a good understanding of the people that you're selling to. And that relates to, there's two sides to that. One of them is like distribution, like how can we get these people? So like, will YouTube ads be a good way for targeting, soccer fans is a question. And if so, what should their first experience be like? But the key thing is just, if you don't, you have to have a really good understanding of what sort of people you're actually designing for. Now that isn't distinct from the idea of personas, which I'm not talking about here. What I'm really talking about is like, what is the behaviors that are likely to work with these type of people? So perfect example would be like, if you're designing, say, a gambling product, you might, naively think, we're going to build a social network where they can all make friends with each other and live stream all their bets. But in practice, you'll realize that like people who actually bet, they don't speak about their losses ever, and they only occasionally talk about their winnings, but they only talk in hindsight, and they'll never tell you what active bets they have. This is all stuff we learned from one project. So you start to realize, well, without that realization, it would make perfect sense to build these activity feeds and social networks inside the product. But in hindsight, it's like that is absolutely not necessary. Like, in fact, it's actually, if anything, it's going to disturb or turn people away from a product. So unless you actually have an understanding, so part of it is like you have to be the type of user, but the other part of it is you have to understand the dynamics that actually happen within groups of people so that you can actually design for them. Yeah.
And then the third one is understanding the technical constraints that the software must work within.
Yeah, so we used to, or in my previous career, I was a consultant where like we were just actual, bona fide UX people, and certainly at different times for different projects, you could really, really like damage yourself if you were already contracted to build something by also going and designing this masterpiece that would like take years to implement. Like, and it's got like at any point you want, you can click and it'll change the color of the video, and you're like, how are you going to build that? So it's really like, it's understanding that technical investment is limited and you have to choose where to invest it wisely. So when I see, say, a startup and it's asking me to sign up and it's asking me for my date of birth, and I see that they've got this fancy ass natural language date picker, what I look at and I sort of think, well, maybe this is a jQuery plugin, maybe it's not, but regardless, they did not need to invest here. This is a big investment that has to be checked across so many different browsers to make sure it works, and there's going to be a lot of like overhead and styling it and making it look good and all that sort of stuff, and it has to be built in the first place and tested for all these weird edge cases that it has to support. That's a real waste of money as opposed to 3 drop downs in a row. But as a designer, if you're just chasing what looks most impressive and you're just basically trying to build up like your dribble points, you're going to go for that. But as somebody who actually is concerned about the product getting built, you have to actually understand, I'm not going to ask you to do that because that's a waste of time. However, where I do want to spend is, over in this other area, which is like where people edit their profile photos, because we're a dating site and that really matters.
Yeah.
Conversely, like if you're like, Flightfox or one of those like, new airline sites or Hipmunk or whatever, your entire product is basically your calendar plus your results view. So yeah, if you want to spend 5 months building the best calendar, absolutely, that's your product. If people can't do that amazing, then it's no point. So for me, it comes down to like, how important is this feature? How much technical ask? How much of a technical ask is what I'm trying to do, and then balancing those against each other.
Yeah, those are great insights. And the next one, you talk about understanding the real world data that will be presented within the application. Is that just really getting a handle on the content so you can design around it?
Yeah, like so there's a lot going on there. Like so part of it is like, it's the classic like lorem ipsum problem, which is like if you're designing, say, something like a blog, you might, think, oh, we'll throw in a couple of images and a couple of paragraphs and we're done. But like maybe the real world data for the person who's actually writing the blog is all bullet point lists and tables and unordered lists and, iframes and videos. And you're like, oh shit, if I had known that, I would have designed it a little bit differently. The classic for me is always, and you can see this across Dribble, is like, the stats dashboard where like every single thing is like, it's like so exciting looking, and it's like, oh my god, everything's up, everything's down. And then you see these designs in reality and it's just like flatline. You had one like yesterday,
Yeah.
And I think, without exposure to the actual data that you're designing for, you're designing with your eyes closed.
Mm-hmm.
There's other things as well. Like people like tend to do like wireframes and comps or PSD files in this like fantasy land where like every paragraph is of equal length and headings never wrap, and like every like piece of text is conveniently the exact right size of its bounding box, and and another classic is like photo galleries or type things. Like so, if you're trying to say design a homepage for like a restaurant, and you're like, okay, cool. They're like, yeah, we want to have these flashy images and let's do a carousel and whatever else is popular. Without actually seeing the data or the content that's going to come in, you can't make an informed decision. So the question has to be, show me how good these photographs are. Because if they're stunning, they're going to be the main feature on the website. Mm-hmm. And if they're shit, we're not going to include them on the website. And if there's some ways in between, we might have them on some secondary page. But like, you can't actually design without knowing what's coming. The problem is that people go for these like cookie cutter templates of, okay, we'll have a big image because that's what everyone else is using. And they're going, well, what's going to be in the image? And they're like, well, and then you get like some like, some shitty like, Android 2.0 photo of a steak that's like burnt. And you're like, yeah, let's put that as the lead image on a restaurant website. Like,
yeah.
And so like, that's really like, it's really important to me to be like, what sort of what content are we designing around and what content are we designing for?
Yeah. And then the last thing you talk about is understanding the tangible, measurable goals of the design. Is that just having the end in mind and designing with some kind of goal, so you're not just designing for dribble points like you said? Yeah,
so, and this, it kind of touches on a lot of different things, but like, if you're designing like a, send message form, it's naive to not look at, the throughput of that form from a message point of view. And, it's almost like counter to like the points. I mean, it's the sobering side of design, which is that like your goal ultimately is to enable behavior. That's what interface is all about. It's like people are here, the solution is here, and your interface is what bridges. Uh-huh. And if you release an interface that like causes less people to get across, it doesn't matter how beautiful it is, it doesn't work. And like we used to have a problem where like most of the web was ugly. And as a result, people couldn't get from A to B, and it was very easy. It was like, well, if you line up your text fields, more people will be able to follow your form. But like these days, it's actually the flip side of the problem is almost people are deifying like design, like just raw beauty, pixel design, like shadows, fonts, typography, layers, flat design, skeuomorphic design, whatever. They're focusing so much on that, and not on like does this thing actually work? So what I'm talking about the last point there is just what's the definition of work here? So, and like you can really apply this at like a sort of a microscopic level. Like, so if you're sitting down to redesign the search box, and like, what is your actual outcome of that? Well, are people finding what they want to do? So maybe your measure is number of repeated searches per person or whatever. But like you'll come up with some idea, and then once you actually have that idea of like, we know exactly what this screen is supposed to do. So all we need to do is find the best way to do that. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of rises above the idea of, oh, well, checkboxes look ugly or radio buttons look blah, or what can we do so I can do that? It's just literally like, of the people who hit here, how many of them get there? And that's really, like, without that, you can produce works of art or terrible design or something that is actually both. Mm-hmm. and not have actually a clue whether or not you've succeeded as a designer.
Yeah, it kind of takes me back to what you talked about with the mission of Intercom, where you have people on your site, they have something they're trying to accomplish, and what stands in the way is the interface, and it's a bridge trying to get them from point A to point B. And Intercom is kind of a tool. It's like the tour guide walking them across the bridge. Hey, try this, go here, do that. It's just one other element of the UX, of the interface, to help bridge that gap a little bit, right?
Absolutely, and that's how a lot of people do use it, especially people who have a small number of large value customers. They certainly, their attitude is like, look, here's the interface, we're pretty sure it works well, but anything you need, click this button and we're here. And they provide a great experience. It's kind of like a white glove service almost for their customers. And some people say, well, that's like Intercom acting as a crutch for the interface, but that's not really true either. It's just really like some customers demand more attention, and if they're more profitable, that's okay. It's like it's not everyone's first choice of business model, but like it certainly makes sense. There's for those who use it in Intercom, they're really happy with doing it that way. But yeah, you're right. Like it's one way to reinforce the bridge of people from A to B is to make sure you're there to answer any problems or be proactive with support or anything.
Yeah. Now, you're also a regular conference speaker. I've seen you online doing a number of talks at different places. You have your speaker deck and things up like that. And one of the presentations you gave kind of caught my eye, and it was called "Simplify by Orders of Magnitude." I love that title because I feel like that's the goal of my life is to simplify by orders of magnitude whenever possible. Just remove a zero. But what role does simplicity play, do you think, in growing a startup? You had your consultancy you talked about before, Contrast, I think is the name of it. You have Intercom.io now. How important is simplicity to growing something?
It's a pretty high level question. I think Jack Dorsey has a great quote, which is like, perfect every detail, but limit the number of details. And I think he's on something there, which is like, whatever you do should be really, really good, but you have to be really fussy about whatever you do. So that's one side of simplicity, but it's almost that's kind of tends towards minimalism rather than simplicity, I guess. For me, like where simplicity is for some people, for some businesses specifically, simplicity is their entire business model. Instagram, for example, made it super simple to share good-looking photos. And if you think of the world pre-Instagram, when I say pre-Instagram, I really mean pre-mobile phone, one-click share things, because I know they weren't the first, but they were the best. That world was like you carry around a camera or some shit like that, and you connect it to a laptop, and you'd import this file, which would be like DSC00004.jpg. You'd throw it into Photoshop to crop it and rotate it so it looks the right way. Then you'd upload it to Flickr, and then you'd mail 3 people and say, "Hey, look, I uploaded that photo, you guys, to Flickr."
Yeah.
And because of that, because that was the workflow, people didn't do it. And this is like the point of that presentation was really that when you simplify something to a large degree, you actually get it's like a butterfly effect. What seems like a small amount of simplification actually causes a massive behavioral change. So the best example I had, Bill Buxton had a perfect one. Was Bill Buxton's a research principal at Microsoft. He's a fantastic guy. He made the point, he studied a lot of history. He said when televisions did not have remote controls, every station was free to run their own scheduling at their own hours whenever it suited them. The very second the remote control became popular, they all had to sync up on their schedules. The reason for this is because everyone could switch channel, but no one was bothered getting up out of their chair to do it. When you give them remote control, the very second your television switches to adverts, they change to another channel. And if the other channel is showing a program, they'll watch that instead. So every television company realized, shit, this is a big problem. Where every single time we go to ads, we lose our customers, and they're like, us too. And they realized this isn't going to work. If the entire population can avoid watching adverts on television, we are in trouble. So they had a meeting, and they all basically agreed worldwide that everyone had to sync up their TV schedules so the ads are on the half hour, or on the 15 minutes, or on the hour.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect example to me of a small change. As in remote control wasn't breakthrough technology. It just simplified something that everyone could already do. But because it became simple, it became something that people do all the time. And because of that, entire ecosystem had to change. And like there are other examples, like I feel Instagram is a good example of that. Like it's $1 billion business built off the back of being simple and streamlined. And there are plenty more. Even like there's flows, like popular flows and products. Intercom's going to mind because I've been talking about it a bit. But like just if it's easy to see who's using your product and talk to them, if it's actually easy, you're going to do it. If it's tip a developer on the shoulder, pull down a CSV of email addresses, import that into a newsletter campaign, select all, write a mail, create a thing, select a template from the gallery. Hey guys, how's the product going? Send. Wait for the replies. You're just not going to do it. Like it's and that's it. Simplicity and like has a multiplicative effect on like the likelihood of you actually doing something.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points on simplicity. Des, this has been an incredible interview. I have a couple final questions for you here. One, what's the best growth hack that you've ever implemented? Something you've done in the product, something you've done with marketing, something that you've done as a team that has really moved the needle for you guys?
It's funny, like I don't think in terms of growth hacks, but I'll still answer the question. Like so, for me,
it's
like
okay, you can hate the word. A lot of people do. That's fine.
Well, I don't know if you saw. I wrote a post on my blog a while ago that said if it's important, don't hack it.
Yeah.
Which is
when I use hack, I don't mean hack it in that way.
I know. I know.
It can be thorough and real.
So like, I feel that like what people commonly refer to as growth hacks fall into two different categories. One of them is like a really good design idea, and the other one is a kind of a shady, maybe you shouldn't really do this in your product sort of idea. And then the sort of the delicate ones are kind of halfway on the bridge between both, But like some stuff that like really took off that people really, really valued for us was we found like anything we find ourselves doing tends to leak its way into the product. So we in Intercom we every day I wanted to see, like in our early days, every day I wanted to see who signed up yesterday. It was really exciting all the time. Like so, like when you're really starting out, and you've got like tens or hundreds of customers, you're like, whoa. So we built this little email to send us an email every day. Here's who signed up, and then we were like, oh, well, let's make an option for everyone else. And like it literally exploded. People were just like, oh my god, this is the most valuable thing I've ever gotten. And that was a real shock to us because we thought it was cool for us, but like, and I guess we should have figured it was definitely gonna be cool for everyone. But like the response was like even greater than we'd hoped. And then it became clear, well, this is something we should double down on. So we dialed it up a bit and gave lots more call to actions and all that. The knock-on effect of all that work really was that people ended up in Intercom much more often. And anyone who installed it but was still kind of on the fence came straight back the following day when they get an email saying like 35 people signed up or whatever. And so that was one example where it's just like if you like a lot of SaaS apps work for people in the background. So and by that, what I mean by that specifically is, especially when you get into the world of like like developer tools and stuff like that, they're actually doing things independent of user action. So it's not like you don't have to be in there typing or whatever. And I feel like one good thing there is just to consistently remind people of the value that you're delivering and give them calls to action to return into your product. Like that's the sort of the abstract lesson here is like whatever your product does for me, you should be able to like summarize that on a weekly basis or whatever and let me know like the value you're delivering. And if you can associate that value with calls to action, the chances of me coming back in is infinitely higher. Yeah. So like that's kind of, that's really my high level tip on that, but the low level tip was just, a daily report mail.
No, that's great. Last question for you here. What's the best advice that you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
Trying to grow in terms of users or just...
Yeah, either way. Maybe users, maybe revenue, maybe they're trying to add employees. They're trying to, they're trying to get bigger, whatever that means to them.
Yeah. So like, I guess if it's like trying to add revenue, I'd, first port of call is always going to be pricing. If it's trying to add customers, I think the biggest thing is to work on what you're good at. So if you're great developers, but not great writers, don't try a blog just because you saw someone else do it. Because if that's not your forte, it's really like a dopey point, but like focusing on what you're really good at. So if you're great developers, build open source tools to complement your product and throw them out there for people and maintain them. Don't just build them and lash them in GitHub and forget about them. Give them a nice site. Do what you can to actually support it. If you're a great writer, do a lot of writing. If you're great visually, do a lot of like comps or give a lot of design examples of how to do things. That's how you'll basically attract. There's such a limited span for attention on the net that there's just no market for suboptimal stuff. So a shitty blog gets no traffic, basically. Bad blogs will get traffic, but for different reasons. Like they'll have like scandalous or sensational posts. But I think in general, like, I've never met a good product that doesn't have people behind it who can market. They just don't realize that what they could do is marketing. So like it might be like, why don't you interview everyone else in your industry? And you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll give that a try or whatever. But what you need first and foremost is attention, and then after attention, hopefully you can move into like activation, acquisition, etc. In terms of growing teams, I don't know, be careful, make sure be thoughtful. There's limit. Like, I mean, it kind of gets into HR sort of stuff there, like about how you can actually advise people. But I think like most startups, their concerns aren't in terms of hiring. It's usually in terms of revenue, which is I have a post on my blog called 4 Principles of Pricing You Should Never Forget. That goes through. But the key points are always the same. It's like charge earlier than you're comfortable with, charge more than you're comfortable with. Plan on changing your prices. Like they're just the things people don't realize about pricing. So that's that would be my main thoughts. So like get your pricing right and find your most effective marketing channel and go nuts on it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much again for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me, Bronson.